This really is the cherry on top of everything that you've ever done in the series. The relationships, all the major plots, the civilizations, the Geth and the Krogan, the genophage, all of this stuff comes to a spectacular conclusion in each of those things. We've built up to a huge climax in a way that you really can't do with just one game. All of these things come to a resolution in Mass Effect 3, and they are resolved in a way that's very different based on what you would do in those situations.
As a series, Mass Effect has frequently been called the Star Wars of this generation. And while it hasn't had nearly the same level of impact on the popular culture, thank God, the level of fan devotion and depth to the lore has made this a pretty valid comparison. However, somewhere in the creation of this series, Mass Effect went very, very wrong. Similar to Star Wars, while the second installment became a huge hit due to its smaller, character-driven narrative, the third seems to retain the same heart, but suddenly the decision-making abilities of the creators has become completely questionable. And due to said fans, whenever BioWare fucks something like this up, they have to deal with tasteful, understated nerd rage. And also these people. Now I know we all think we know where Mass Effect 3 went wrong. We blame it on things like corporate mergers, Connect implementation.
I don't need her trust.
I'm Commander Shepard.
Pandering to a multiplayer market. Or just plain sloppy storytelling. However, the biggest flaws of Mass Effect 3 actually exist within the mechanics themselves. Now this video is going to detail flaws in Mass Effect 3's game design. It's not going to be a nitpick video about plot holes or marketing blunders. You've gotta be fucking kidding me. Is that actually in the goddamn game? Anyway. Mass Effect 3 is a game, so the core problems I'm going to talk about are with the gameplay. But stick around. You might find that a lot of these problems I'm going to talk about parallel with some of your own frustrations about other aspects of the game. Mass Effect 3 was having problems right out of the gate, even from the way it started. You see, this game was missing a key phase that I like to call acclimation. This is simply a stage where you have time to become adjusted to a game's mechanics before anything too strenuous is thrown at the player. You see, unlike a movie, where the process of enjoying it is always the same, no two video games engage the player in exactly the same way. Because of this, your opening sequence not only has to introduce your player to the game's story, but also to the game's mechanics. So let's break down the opening. We start with some ominous build-up to the action. So far, so good. Then we're reintroduced to Shepard in a scene that's filled with auto-dialogue and has Shepard interacting with characters that she knows but the player does not. Now this has happened before, but this time it's framed as if we should actually know Freddie Prinze here. Then some things happen, and Shepard is given a gun and asked to escape during the most important event in the entire series to this point. This is also the exact same point that you are given full control with all combat mechanics at your disposal. This is the single biggest mistake that you can possibly make for the opening of your game. At this point in the game, your player is not engaged in the fact that giant robots are trying to murder people. They spend their time thinking this. How do you play this fucking game? Sweater just pushed this button and... Whoa. Shepard just moved. You get a gun? Oh, well, fuck the Alliance. I'll take this shit on by myself. You want some, huh? You want some? Where you kids going, huh? Huh? Where you kids going? Help! Help! Stay back, you beast! How do I talk to this guy? Oh, shit. Shit. The key problem here is that at this point in the gaming experience, the player isn't immersed in your story. They're immersed in a learning experience. At this particular point in the game, the most important point in the franchise so far, do you know what I felt? Nothing. For a game that prides itself on storytelling, this is a very serious problem. So let's look at an example of a game that does this right. You don't even have to look too far. Just 2 years ago, back in Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect 2's opening is so fucking brilliant, and all because it uses a very simple mantra. Make no assumptions about the player. Now I know what you're thinking. This is not the same thing as saying, assume the player is stupid. Just watch. So Mass Effect 2 starts right in the middle of the action. After only a small bit of exposition, the Normandy is immediately attacked and characters you know and love are killed horribly. While you watch. When you finally do get control of Shepard, you only get control of 2 things, movement and the camera. You do this as you navigate an environment that returning players know intimately, but new players won't be confused by due to debris obstructions. This simple opening with the smallest number of mechanics available to you allows the player to be completely immersed in the story while still learning how to play the game. BioWare made the intelligent decision of saving the more difficult, confusing, and strenuous lessons for later on in the game when nothing nearly as important was going on. You know what would have made this sequence suck? If they put a gun in Shepard's hand and forced you to fight through wave after wave of fucking aliens on the way to the bridge. In order to enjoy the story in a game, the player needs to have enough familiarity with its mechanics in order to get emotionally invested. You'll notice that in great game openings, a player isn't immediately told to escape from a pool of fire, they aren't forced to carve through hordes of beasts, and they aren't barraged by expository dialogue before an old dragon god attacks Salt High. Oh, wait a second. Part of the reason why game critique and development is so hard is because it can be difficult to identify the prime point of engagement for your player. Sometimes even a developer can miss this. However, knowing the core mechanic of your game is important. Let's do a warm-up exercise here. Let's look at a game like Gears of War. Now without cheating, I want you to tell me what is the most important thing about Gears of War. It's not this.
I'm so sorry, Maria. I tried to find you.
Or this. It's this! Gears of War is all about brutal combat. So with each installment, the developers knew to polish and expand that specific element further and further each time. So, are you ready for the real test? Okay then, I want you to tell me what the most important thing about Mass Effect is. It's not this. Or this. It's this. I know, it's crazy, right? Mass Effect's biggest draw has always been role-playing, and it's always used the dialogue wheel to accomplish this. It's so simple. Gather information here, make decisions here. This mechanic is so brilliant that I'd even go as far as to say that it is the best role-playing mechanic developed this entire generation. So I wonder, why the hell did BioWare cripple this mechanic in the final installment? Suddenly we see a massive increase in auto-dialogue and trees with only 2 options. This is the mechanic that allows players to interact with the game. Why was it so simplified? Even the removal of a neutral option for most exchanges greatly decreases the role-playing possibilities available. Imagine if in the climax of the original game that the concentrate on sovereign option was removed. Sure, it has the same net effect as letting the council die, but one of them just comes off with complete malicious intent. The middle road is important. It allows for a Commander Shepard who walks a line between Holy Saint and... Yeah. And what about that wonderful auto-dialogue? I'm still trying to wrap my head around why BioWare assumed that auto-dialogue was a good idea in a role-playing game primarily driven by dialogue. There are just way too many casual instances where the player is given no input at all. Now don't get me wrong, auto-dialogue does have a lot of uses. It can advance the action in pivotal scenes in the game. However, this method is employed so often in Mass Effect 3 that you frequently get the idea that Commander Shepard isn't really your character at all. Why am I flirting with James Vega? Why Shepard never really dug the meatheads? She always preferred the short round types. No, not that kind. Yeah, that kind. One of the biggest draws of this series has always been side quests. But one wonderful benefit of them is that they were actually optional. In the first game, aside from Rex's family armor, the Geth incursion, and arguably the rogue VI on the moon, none of these side quests were required. They didn't really tie into the main quest at all. In the second game, loyalty missions factored heavily into the ending, but since your squad is basically what the entire game was about, that was okay. Now there were some missteps like having to scan planets so you could afford upgrades so Thane wouldn't need extreme acupuncture, but all the other side quests in the game were completely up to player discretion. And they were usually pretty rewarding. They were challenging, they forced you to make rudimentary choices, and they just had a lot of creativity behind them. In Mass Effect 3, BioWare had a different creative vision. Namely to make the side quests fucking boring! Any side quest that wasn't directly related to the story in Mass Effect 3 was just a chore. Violate someone's privacy, then give them exactly what they were looking for. Scan a planet, get chased by Reapers, find some assets. Whatever. The major problem here is that this stuff is actually important this time. There's something like 700 EMS points attached to these quests. So, you don't want to use your Spectre terminal to authorize a drywall construction contract to help the Volus prevent his house from going into foreclosure? Well then fuck you, you don't get the green. That's right, it's Harbinger. You see, Mass Effect 3 lacked a clear villain for the player to oppose. You might think this is a strange argument when talking about game mechanics and design, but it actually ties back into the second point. If the prime point of engagement in Mass Effect is dialogue, why does the player only get to interact with the Reapers through combat? There's only one time in the game where we actually speak to a Reaper, and that is very, very brief. Strangely, Elusive Man seems to take place of the main antagonist despite the fact that he doesn't represent the Reapers at all. I mean, I know he's obviously indoctrinated, but his position is still to actively fight against them and even control them. He does not support them wholeheartedly. Now, you might think this sounds a little hokey, but a primary antagonist in a video game allows your player to directly oppose the bad guys through the mechanics of the game. This is something that BioWare has done before to great effect. So why did they get rid of Harbinger?
Assuming direct control, we are the harbinger of your perfection. You will regret your resistance, Shepard. This hurts you.
Oh. Well, couldn't they have just, not done that? So who do the Reapers have? Why? Why a new character in the last 10 minutes of the game? Harbinger was clearly set up as the main antagonist in the last one, especially with the Arrival DLC. The only time we actually oppose Harbinger in gameplay is when he fucking annihilates Hammer Team. 10 seconds where we're in direct opposition of the leader of the Reapers, and then what? Oh, he just leaves. It's okay. I'm sure he sent his best people to handle the rest. God, everyone's favorite part. Now everyone complains about the writing for everything following the beam segment, but I started seeing flaws from the moment Shepard lands on Earth. Now when the fleet jumps in, it's pretty satisfying. That's the culmination of an entire game's work. However, from there, the entire thing falls apart. Where the hell is Hammer Team? Where's the Horde of Krogan that helps you fight on the ground? Or the Turian bombers that help you shoot down the Reaper on Tuchanka? I mean, this doesn't feel like a galaxy saving Earth. It feels like Commander Shepard cleaning up the mess after the Alliance fails. In the last game, after you spent so much time preparing for the suicide mission, you get to see all of your hard work pay off in a satisfying way. But here, despite all the time you spent fleet building, you never get to see any real resolution outside of this one cutscene. I wouldn't really be complaining about this if previous BioWare games hadn't already handled this with such a level of aptitude. I mean, this ends up being the most disappointing element of all. In Dragon Age and Mass Effect 2, you get to see all of your hard work bear fruit. But in Mass Effect 3, it's still just you against the world, just like it has been from the very beginning. But whatever, let's just get up that beam. Now, it's no secret that people find this last segment to have horrible flaws in the writing, and while I do truly find that to be bad, my biggest complaints with this are with the design of the final moments of the game. Notice how despite being probably the worst written exchange of the series, people don't really complain about this bit with Elusive Man? That's because it's well designed. You gather information, use persuasion options, make decisions, and even get a chance to use some interrupts. All of the most important gameplay elements are present and used to great effect, with great differences depending on how you interact with the game. So why didn't we get something like that here? The lack of dialogue options here is so baffling that I'm still questioning the thought process of the developers. The most important mechanic of the game and the most important scene, and the player is given almost no input at all. And then of course there's this final choice. Now, despite trying to be clever by doing a thing in the opening of this video, the colored explosions aren't really the problem here. The problem is that the way that this is designed ignores all the build-up from the previous games. The solitary goal has always been to destroy the Reapers, so why is the only option to make this happen painted as the worst one with the highest level of consequence? From the bottom up, Synthesis should really be the worst ending. It's a compromise made to prevent the deaths of billions during this cycle. That's exactly what Saren fought for in the first game. It should not be considered the best option. In the middle should be Control, since we spent the entire game fighting with Elusive Man about this very idea, Paragon or Renegade. Not 5 minutes ago we could have convinced him to shoot himself because he was wrong about trying to attempt this only to end up doing it anyway. That makes no sense at all. This should be a middle road option because you don't have the resources available to destroy the Reapers. And finally, the best ending, requiring the maximum EMS and the best fleet composition, should be Destroy. For making all the right decisions, you're rewarded by being allowed to accomplish what you set out to do from the very beginning. Also, your good friends the Geth shouldn't have to be wiped out for this. And yes, I do know BioWare is planning on fixing this ending through DLC, but it just begs the question. With such incredibly well-designed missions like the ones on Rannoch and Tuchanka where your input has such a strong level of impact, why wasn't this just fleshed out well in the first place? See, this just goes back to making assumptions about your player. Assuming that they have a stable internet connection and an Xbox Live subscription in order to play your ending is asinine. What's on the disc is important. You never get to make that first impression twice. Believe me. So by now you're probably getting the idea that I hated Mass Effect 3, and while it was very flawed, I actually did enjoy it a lot. So why make a 20-minute video picking apart something that I actually liked? Well, I've been a huge BioWare fan since I first played Baldur's Gate back in 2002, and unfortunately, this isn't the first time that these trends have popped up. A sloppy opening, ignoring the prime point of engagement, and a blank, unsatisfying ending that angers gamers everywhere. As a fan, I just want to see their games flourish. And as long as they make good games, I don't really care about this other crap like Connect and multiplayer, Spectre packs, Facebook games, iOS apps, t-shirts, comic books. Jesus Christ, what the fuck is next? A Mass Effect cereal? Right. I'll take 20.
Bump. Ready? We'll do one.
Yeah.
Okay, go.